All right, we're experimenting because we are recording a video for the first time. I haven't done it, so this is take 48.
It's a lie.
I know. Well, it said it was live, and so I thought it was live. So we shut things down and thought, oh, we better check and see if we're actually live on YouTube, which
So
we
this is
weren't. So when
live.
we tried again, it kicked Jason out, and then so here we are.
Yeah.
So hi, Jason.
Hi, Kevin.
Thanks for coming back. It's nice of you to join. We were in the conversation, and I think it had happened a few times or several times between you and I around the higher self, and it kept coming up. And I remember one time it was in a message, and it was like you had said something about HS, and I'm like, what is HS? I was like, I didn't know what it was. Anyways, here we are, and in our collaboration that we did about 2 weeks ago, the higher self came up a lot, and there were some questions, and so we thought we would have a conversation around the higher self. And we were like, oh, are we going to script this, or is there going to be this? And I don't have anything. It's pretty open, and so we're just going to kind of see how spirit kind of takes us and the conversation goes.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, I mean, what's the higher self?
That's I guess I think that's what we were trying to figure out before this.
Mhm.
And it's the more that you talk about it, the more it's difficult. And I don't like saying it because it's more they. I guess the best way to start, and it was kind of what we talked about briefly in that last show, was the fact that, we can think of it in one way in terms of memory. Our higher self could be considered that part of ourselves that is higher in one way, but it's not. I kind of always get the sense from higher selves that it's not a matter of higher or lower or better or any of that, because we're all learning in our own ways, regardless of what type of level we are. So that's that. Even with dimensions, I've been told that there's no really, there's higher dimensions, but it's not really a hierarchy as we think of it. But memories. So we have our memory on the earth of this lifetime, and then some of us have access to other memories, which is great. And a lot of people are experiencing that with the change in the vibration with the earth and everything that's going on now. So we are slowly having a broader memory of not only this lifetime's, but maybe peaks, or kind of jumps into other lifetimes. The higher self is that aspect of ourself that has all knowledge of everything. So about us. So it has awareness of all the lives we have lived, all the lives that we're living potentially, and kind of, the contracts we've made and the contract that we have in this lifetime, what we created for ourselves before we came here. And the higher self, essentially, or our higher selves, keep us on track and different ways in this life. And we, whether we remember it or not, we drew up this contract and symbolically presented it. And, it's an agreement where we're going to do this, and also you cannot interfere. So the higher self, can give us little nudges, and we can tap in for information, but it's not like our higher persona can jump in and change up, put us on the course or anything like that. It's non-interference. So that's one way to understand the higher self.
So would you say because I'm feeling like spirit's it's interesting when we're in conversation, you'll have more of the explanation around it, and as you're talking, I'm always getting these hits from spirit and the questions, and then just different pieces, and in it feels like we're all in relationship with our higher self.
Yeah.
like with, and none of us are like, none of us are separate from that, is the feeling that they make me have. And that what that looks like individually can be very, very different.
Yeah, I mean that's always an important thing to think about, and I think it's awesome that you're like getting the background conversation, because I feel like that also kind of keeps me on track. But
Mm.
I yeah, it's always important to really consider that, we are all one, and there's no distinction between, for example, you and me and anyone else. It's just a matter of our human experience. And I think that's an aspect
Mm.
that the higher self always kind of stresses.
Mhm.
And, that's part of our human condition that we really forget about, that we are all
Mhm.
connected. We're all little pieces of each other, and we all are part of, the greater plan. And we're here to learn. And the higher, we say higher self, but that can apply to so many different aspects. Again, it's just this pocket concept. And I think that's why it's so difficult to define,
Right.
because that's part of our, and which has come from our higher selves that I've experienced with clients and hypnosis. We have a very limited perception, and that's what we agree to when we come in here. And that's part of our learning experience, in order to understand that everything I do for myself, I'm doing for everyone, and everything I do for someone else is doing something for myself. There's no distinction. So it
Mhm.
kind of gives us a responsibility that, for some of us, we might think, oh, I know it's good to do something for someone else. Or there's that question of altruism, like Mother Teresa. I remember philosophy classes where there was always that $1 million question: is, if you is giving your life away to someone, or if you're a nun or any type of thing where you're sacrificing, for example, your life for some cause or something, is that really altruistic? Are you really doing something and not having any place in that? Or is it, are they still selfish because they get happiness and joy from helping others and everything else? And from the higher self's perspective, it's kind of silly, because it's
Mm.
not a question. I mean, it's
Yeah.
everything you do it comes back to you, whether for better or good.
Mhm. Yeah, it makes me feel like, by nature, there's none of that, like, I'm not good enough. There's none of that judgment. There's none of that competition that can arise in it. Then when it looks different for you than it does for me, that it's not a deficit. It's still the same
Yeah.
beautiful gift, if you will. We're still in that same connection, whether our understanding and our ability to, because that's the thing, it feels like there's um, in our humanness, and in that's what this is. It's going to look different, you know what I mean? And just because it looks different, it doesn't mean that it's better or worse. It's just different in that.
Right. I mean, that's one of the biggest lessons that continually comes through from my experience with the higher self, and even, other cases I've heard with hypnosis, is that there's no good or bad, and there's no wrong or right. It's the limitations of how we, characterize things. But it's, at the end of our lifetimes, and we go to the other side and we return to source and light, we don't look back on our lives and see that you made mistakes, or
Mm.
something you could have done something better, or you could have acted better, or there's none of that. It's just everything's a learning experience. So even if in this life you're not the most giving person, that's your choice. And I mean, it's a learning
Mhm.
experience, and you look back on the life and say, hey, I see that now. And it's whether or not you choose to fix it in the next lifetime, and I don't even like using the word fix, because it's not really broken.
Yeah. Well, spirit brings that through all that, like daily in my readings, where they get to see their life reflection, and they get to see the impact of their choices and their actions and all of that in all of the people
Mhm.
that they've connected with. And in that, what's let go of is all of the emotion of like, I should have done that, or I did this, and all of the heaviness of those types of emotion, if you will, and being
Yeah.
I wanted to say separate of that, just in the evolvement back to that by nature that yeah, we get so caught up on the like I'm doing it wrong. And I guess that's where I'm going, where they're taking me with this is that how do we identify what that communication looks like with the higher self? Because there's so many of us that are like searching and feeling called to better that communication, to understand it a little bit more, to identify it easier. I'm curious if there's anything around that for you.
I mean, again, I'm going from my own experiences,
Mm-hmm.
which I think is important to pinpoint because, you know, I would never claim to be an expert on higher selves, but the message is always the same. And, you know, we are so connected. So it's nothing that, you know, anyone has any particular ownership over the knowledge. But, and that for everyone, it's a different experience. You know, it can be numbers and repetition and patterns, and that might be a manifestation of for you to tap in and like pay attention. And it really depends on what you particularly need at a particular time, what you'll understand, um, you know, what is within your realm of perception and what you're open to. All are factors in how your higher self will communicate with you. So those, I mean, the most generalized way of thinking of it is intuition. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
that's that part of ourselves that, you know, classically we associate that with women, which is totally not the case. I mean, it's that gut feeling, or you
Mm-hmm.
know, you look back at something and you do something and you knew you shouldn't have gone that way. And again, it's not right or wrong choice, but you choose a different direction, and then it's you look back and think, why did I do this when I had that instinct that like,
Mm-hmm.
no, don't do it, or no, this is a really bad idea, and you still go through with it. And that's it's like the higher self isn't some mystical magical thing that we have to learn about. It's something that's already within us.
Right.
It's that driving force, and it's just that we don't recognize it as it's been un you know, unfortunately characterized as a weakness to think of, you know, thinking being led by our intuition or our emotions, or you know, our logical side is like always yapping in our head like, oh yeah, you can do this anyway, you know, it won't really matter. But our guts, our emotions, and our heart are just like, no, no, don't do it, and we do it. And
Mm-hmm.
so that's kind of like higher self 101, and it's something that's familiar to all of us. I mean,
Right.
we
Yeah.
get those intuitions, whether, you know, regardless of gender or anything else like that. It's part of our human experience, but we've just been taught to suck it up and move on, which is the most horrible horrible
Mm-hmm.
philosophy. And especially when I don't know, it's it's just so important.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it takes me back to that question. They're asking it again around in our experiences. Is that perhaps a communication playing out different than how we hear it or feel it, but guidance or support from the higher self, just in that very nurturing, because it is support, but yet there's that feeling of like not going to override. And and we get that from angelic realm, we get that from guides and loved ones and deities and gods and all of this support that we have,
Hmm.
but they don't fully override in a way that they allow us to have our experiences. And so that's it feels like there might be something there in that.
I think the biggest thing, and this is kind of the direction that I'm being pushed, is that we, you know, we've come to this point with science and scientific thought and, kind of the whole I need to believe it, I need to experience to see it or believe it, or I need scientific proof in order for me to believe it, or, any of those type of I need science to tell me that something is right or wrong before I'm going to go jump down that rabbit hole. But and this might sound
I love
totally
it.
random, but I'm getting there.
I love it.
But even within the realm of science, we're seeing that there are now limitations. I mean, with that new telescope, what is it, the James Webb telescope, that's able to put things in a clearer perspective than we've ever imagined. And now science is seeing things in a new light, literally. But even with quantum mechanics and advancement in quantum science, it's turned into where mysticism is becoming kind of the norm. I mean, with the understanding of quantum, that time isn't linear. And I think it's the superposition. I'm not a scientist, clearly, but one particle on the other end of the universe can be connected with another particle. So it's kind of like science is turning back in a way to where mysticism is the new old reality. So with that, I mean, if you are scientific minded and I need scientific proof that the higher self exists, or that type of mentality, or I need a physical manifestation of something. I need to see an angel, or I need to see my guides right in front of me in my room right now. And that's it could happen, which would be amazing. It has happened for people. Think of religions throughout history and what we consider to be myths. I mean, I would encourage people to revisit those. I mean, it's the knowledge that I've gained from my own work as with the hypnosis and communicating with the higher self is those stories aren't so far. They're not a matter of myth. I mean, there's our human interpretation to the best of our abilities within our perceptions, but it's that we have limitations.
Yeah. So I love that. Jason, I'm being reminded of what I think I only shared this with you. I was doing readings. They're saying share this. I will, because I feel like this is a limitation. I don't know if you know what story I'm going to share, but it was like I was in and out of my office, and the master bedroom and then the master bathroom is through a hallway. And I was getting ready. I was in the washroom, and I ended up in my office again. And then I was like, oh, I had forgot something. So I went to go back out my office, and I saw the door of the bathroom closed. And I was like, okay, something felt like not right. I opened up the door, and then I was back in the bathroom, and I went, wait a second. And I realized that I had went from the bathroom. I didn't open the door, and I didn't walk through the closet into the bedroom, through the other door, down the hallway, and back into my office. What occurred was that I went from my bathroom with the door closed into my office. And when I went into the humanness of trying to, even saying it now, it's like, what are you talking about? You know what I mean? But it's like the limitation. So in that, to me, it just feels fitting in what you just explained around, in the humanness of it, the limitations that we put on that potential is sometimes really narrow. I'll speak for myself. And so trying to wrap my head around it, I was like, because that's the thing, if I had placed my attention and actually wanted to do that, I think I'd have gotten, I probably would have walked into the door 100 times and then went, okay, wait a sec. I can't do this.
But I mean, but that is, perfectly, that ties in with the higher self, because in those instances, when I meet with clients who have these questions, like, I think my grandmother is playing jokes on me. With clients who come into sessions. I mean, this can even go in the direction of the paranormal and spirit and afterlife. I mean, that's why it's so hard to define higher self, because the higher self knows what's going on, and whether or not the higher self is quote unquote responsible for it. I mean, it could be your grandmother, your grandfather, coming
Mm,
in. And I had a client who it was she was very, she was kind of teetering on this spiritual journey and understanding what she can't see, what she can't prove. And she grew up in a house where her grandfather lived in this barn out back. And he eventually passed away, but they had this really, really strong bond. And there's always seems like there's always that one family member for us that we have that special bond. A lot of times grandparents, I don't know what, that's a question on my to-do list for
mm,
a higher self. But she eventually moved in, and I mean, she got it. She was in her 20s, and she always had this inkling feeling that her grandfather was there, because things would happen, and she always got the intuition, like, this is my grandfather, because he was a prankster and he used to play
mm,
jokes on me all the time as a kid. So there would be times she would like leave for work and her door would be locked and she couldn't get out. And then she was like, I can't get out of how is this even possible? Like,
yeah.
how would the door be locked from the outside in if I am the only one with a key and I'm inside? So the only thing she could think of, or only explanation she could find, is my grandfather's playing a joke on me.
Mm,
And so it was a matter of going into the hypnosis, and it was almost just like a stupid question to ask. Like, she wants to know if her grandfather is there with her and playing jokes on her. And her grandfather actually, sometimes spirit comes in with hypnosis, and her grandfather was there, and he was like, yeah, that's me.
mm, yeah.
Like,
Next
even
question.
asking the question was just ridiculous. But it's that
Yeah.
I'm having an experience that I can't explain, and my gut, my higher self is in line with that and saying, it's your grandfather, don't question it, just
Mm,
take it, and it's a gift. But then we just beat it to death with our minds and our limited perception. And the same with, walking through the wall. I mean, obviously it happened. Can we explain it? No.
mm.
But it's like, what difference does it make? I mean, in the whole picture of things, ideally we all can do that.
Interesting. So again, as you're talking, I'm getting that they kind of showed me that like a circuit breaker, and it was this aspect and energy of the higher self, and the aspect and energy of our spirit, and then the humanness in kind of the middle, and it was this little kind of blip within the current, and it makes me wonder. If if our you said it was, and it was while you were explaining kind of that gut feeling. So if you place your spirit in that gut, or wherever it may reside for you, the connection with the higher self, I don't want to say it's better, but it could be different, potentially, with that aspect versus the
Yeah.
human aspect.
I mean, that description makes me think of particle wave. I mean,
Oh,
it's like,
mm,
you know, we have light, and light obviously is everything. And sometimes scientifically, I mean,
mm,
this isn't
mm,
anything new. And I'm sure anyone who's paid attention to the science, sometimes light acts as a particle, sometimes it acts as a wave. And I think if
mm,
we think of ourselves with light, do we consider ourselves to be like what you just got with, that circuitry? Are we on, do we live our lives as a wave, or do we live it as a particle? Do we see ourselves as
mm,
limited, or do we open ourselves up to our higher self in this kind of like the unknown journey, and being open to and receptive? And that's actually really,
it's
like,
interesting.
I get into this type of thing, and
Mhm. Yeah.
but it's
Well,
true.
we
It's like,
started to go there.
and there's so many applications for that. It's like, do we allow ourselves to be the river, or do we allow ourselves to be the leaf? I mean, it's really, there's, yeah.
Well,
Sorry.
if you think about it, no, I love it. If you think about the humanness of us, and where it's like, if you speak English and I speak French, and that's it. You don't speak French and I don't speak English. It's like you could get really loud in your English and I'm still not going to understand it. And it's like, but if you kind of showed me in a way that I could feel that you were excited, or if you were angry, or if that you were fearful, it's like that's a whole different communication. So in it, it's like, because they're showing me like there's aspects of it, and I could totally have this completely wrong, of the higher self getting a little bit, if we had to place a feeling around it, an emotion to identify it and understand it, frustration, because it's like they're really like they really try in so many different ways, and yet sometimes we just can't understand it, you know. So I don't know where I'm going with that, but it just I find it really interesting.
I mean, no, that ties in. I mean, I guess one of my abilities to see, connections and patterns. But I mean, language is another example, the limitations of language. And, even as, again, in hypnosis, and I'm communicating with, people's higher selves, whatever that may manifest of in the particular session, there's always that, even for them, there's that barrier with language because, we use language, and that's really, really frustrating. Well, yeah, sometimes they get frustrated because it's like they try to communicate things that we don't have words for with clients or with a person, because all they have access is to the what we have built into our brains in terms of language and concepts. And so if we don't understand something personally, I mean, yeah, it's interesting because it's like what we know and what we choose to think about and what we explore spiritually, like opening ourselves up to, is also the type of communication that we open up ourselves to with our higher self. So if there's some advanced, quantum idea, or, just being open to that and having that vocabulary does sometimes allow the higher self to communicate in ways that is more accessible to them in order to communicate with us. But then it works both ways too, because there's sometimes that, like in past lives, people might be talking about, I'll say I had this client that she experienced a lifetime as another being, another entity on another planet that I don't even know if it was a planet, because it was just this vibrant experience where she saw these purples and these pinks, and she was on this beach, and there's this really beautiful ocean. But then she also described that there was two different types of water, that like it was, which I've heard recently, that if people knew that there was different types of water, we'd be blown away. But she almost described that she was in this world where everything was kind of water, but then there was a heavier water that was the ocean, and she was part of that. And then when she came to looking at her body, it was almost like her conscious mind was like, oh my God, my feet are blue. And these are my feet. And then she continued, and it was like she was beginning to see that she was this tall, skinny blue being with dark eyes, and she had these tattoos. And then when she began really kind of melding with this being, it was like this whole different life for her. But one of the things that she did is she was a researcher, and she received telepathic communication from everywhere, from planets, from solar systems, from galaxies. And she was kind of like this, without traveling, she was kind of like this beacon where people would ask, or different energies or bodies would ask for help and what they needed at a particular time. And so it was really interesting that she at the time was researching prosperity. And I kept asking questions like, well, what are you going to do with that? And she was like, well, I'm learning about prosperity so that I can help. And I was like, it was kind of, I had to wrap my head around, like, I was asking these questions, but it was just like, that was what she was doing. She was there to receive these messages, and she was by this ocean or this lake or whatever it was. She was actually taking a break because she was like, sometimes it gets really noisy with all of us coming in. But she said, and I'm getting to my point, she was talking about Gaia. And she said one of the planets that really needs help right now is Gaia, and she needs my help. And I said, oh, that's really interesting. And I know about Gaia, I know that concept, but it was surprising to me after she came out of the lifetime and we were talking about it and she listened to the recording. um, she asked me point blank right after the session, and I was talking about what she was doing, and I used the word Gaia, and she was like, what's Gaia? And so it was like this really, I knew that happens
Mhm.
sometimes, like where information comes through, and it's sometimes it's people have no concept or idea of what might be coming through or talked about. And that was one example where I said, well, that's another name for the earth. So that was a long way to say sometimes the higher self is able to communicate, but there are limitations, and they do get
Yeah.
frustrated when they can't do that. Gaia is
Mhm.
kind of accessible, but there are other vibrations. There's things that cannot be put into words, which goes to say there's ways that our higher self communicates with us, but we might not understand it, but we can feel it. And that's one thing with language. I mean, regardless if we speak the same language, there are some universal, you can tell when someone's angry, regardless of what language they speak. They can tell when
Mhm.
someone's being loving and accepting, regardless of what type of language they speak. You can tell when someone needs help, regardless of what language they speak. And that's part of what connects us all. And it's that, if you want to call it telepathic, I mean, that's one direction we're all headed to, and we already do it. We just aren't aware of it. And that's one thing with the higher self. It's like, we do have these barriers, but there's ways we communicate that lie beyond language. And that's what brings us together and that's one of the kind of the circuits we can travel on and realize
Mhm.
just because someone speaks a different language, or just because someone isn't extremely educated and has the vocabulary, the fundamental basic human emotions that bring us together, that's essentially what really is important.
Mm. And not separate from the higher self.
Yeah. I mean, I'm being pushed in the direction now. It's like that's the language of the higher
Yeah,
self.
that is. Yeah, I love it how they brought us there. Um, that's it, because there's those people that, including myself, where it's like sometimes I just want, yeah, exactly. I want the full picture. You know what I mean? And when I don't get the explanation or the visual, or I'm not able to see or experience, it's like there can be that frustration. So what is there any like tips to kind of
It's like I feel like, and this is always, I mean, I think it's part of our human struggle, is like the harder we work at something, or the
yeah.
more that we want something, or, something happens and we latch onto it so hard, and then it disappears and it's gone. It's functioning in a different way. And
Mm.
that's, the hypnosis, for example, is one way to tap into that, because we don't have our humanness like yapping and confusing us. And part of our human condition is, which I said in the last show, I kind of want to touch on that I said that humans were the only ones that experience motion, which is clearly not the case. I just phrased it wrong, that
Yeah.
dogs, animals experience emotion, but the key distinction is we struggle with it. Like, it's so hard for us to discriminate between our higher selves that are communicating us one way, and we have emotional, we know what we feel in certain circumstances or situations, but then we have that other side of us that it gets confused, like, no, don't say that, that's not right. Or um I had a client who felt really guilty that she had done everything she could do for her sister, who was dying of cancer. And she felt comfortable enough with me to feel like, I've done everything I can do. I am totally exhausted, and I feel like, I like all I do is that. And she was like, there's a part of me where it's like, I can't anymore. And she felt guilty about it, but
Mm.
it was more societal. Like she felt like she would be perceived as a horrible sister in the eyes of others, but there was that she felt that need that she needed to move on for herself and for her children and her family and her kids, and she couldn't be that for them because she was so
Mm.
taken with taking care of her sister. And so in the higher self's perspective, it's like, which kind of goes with how our bodies manifest things. Anger is manifested through cancer and withheld anger. And that in that moment, that was validated for me. And this is communication from the higher self that anytime we manifest anger, that's because we haven't addressed things that we are, you know, our higher selves are trying to tell us, or in that case, her higher sister or higher sister.
Oh, that's interesting. Mhm.
But in that circumstance, it was, her sister was holding a lot of anger towards not only the sister that was taking care of her, the one that I was working with, but she was harboring anger towards so many other people. And that was the crux and the cause of her cancer. And in a way, it was kind of like, she needs to deal with this cancer, or
Mhm.
with the cancer, but she needs to deal with this anger that she's not releasing. And there's that moment where you have to stay on your path, do what you feel is right, and live your life, and you have lessons to learn. And it was really emotional for her after she came out of the hypnosis
Mhm.
and heard that. But it was also liberating for her that this is a moment when I can live my life, and I know that what I've been feeling, that I need to take care of my family and I need to move on and do everything I can do to be who I am, was empowering for her. And it
Mhm.
was really emotional. Like, this was her realization that,
Yeah.
all this time I've been getting this information from myself that I shouldn't feel guilty, and I feel guilty about not feeling guilty about that. So
Mhm.
that's an example. We get so confused with our emotions and what we
Yeah.
think is right and wrong. We're the only ones who do that. So it's not that we don't, we're the only ones who have emotions, but we're the only ones that we are so caught up in our thoughts and emotions and
Yeah.
everything else, and what we should do and what we're taught we should do and who we should be versus what we feel like we are and what we should be doing. And that's why the earth is such a hard school, because we have this conflict all the time. And
Yeah.
sometimes the emotions we feel aren't our own, they could be other people's. I mean, it's messy, and that's why we
Mhm.
came here.
Yeah. Well, that's just it. Back to the true, nature of who we are. We have that ability, um, and when it's all stripped down and there's none of that illusion surrounding it, we have that ability to make that choice. And in the humanness, it's like we struggle, and we struggle, and we struggle, and that it's not that we don't have that knowing in the doing part of it, that it
Yeah.
just it's so different. It's
And
so
it's
different.
it's and it's also, it's so, like, a part of it too is her sister was so, like, she was harboring guilt, and she was harboring, you know regret, remorse. And so it's it's almost like you're by not following your path and doing what you know you need to do
Mm,
in a way that's harboring remorse and regret and shame for making a decision that was for you and not for someone else who is in a position where she needed to take certain actions in her life. That no wonder why we have, like, so much illness and so much pain
mm,
and so much misery, is because we're not following our higher selves and our guides who are saying, you need to live your life. You came here for a reason and purpose. And one of them was not to take care of someone who is learning their own lessons and might have chosen a particular path that is not your own. Um, and that's hard for some people to swallow.
mm,
It's really hard. I mean, I've had clients who haven't, they just don't get along with their families and they feel so guilty about it. And it's like, and I've had the higher self come in And actually, I'll admit it was someone in my family who hasn't talked to a sibling for 20 years because of certain circumstances. And she always felt this guilt that she cut the ties. And I asked the higher self, and I said, is it necessary for her to, reach out and rekindle this, it's her sister, and she's always carried this guilt. And the higher self was flat out said, it'd be really good for her sister, but for this family member of mine, it would be a bad decision, and it's okay to move on and do what you do.
Sorry.
Go ahead. Yeah.
Were you done?
Yeah, it was done. I mean, it was like the thing that I've learned from higher selves is that we have this concept and we have this social feeling of obligation, but when there isn't that connection, and sometimes our family members, we come here for a reason to help them, to try to show them love or affection or the ability to feel. And when they choose another path, it's okay. And it's more of, we know, it's like, I know I've tried everything I can do, but it's okay. It's okay to move on. And and deep down, we kind of know that's right.
Yeah.
So that's another manifestation of the higher self. It's like that conflict we fight and battle with, and it's not just about should I have the it's like major decisions and things that we're taught, and the way that comes through. I mean, I could go with other examples.
Well, they're showing me this, like, it's a little abstract, and so I've never put this into words before, so bear with me, but it's like this visual of this like charger, like the higher self being this like source of energy that's this like charger. And when we transition into the world we call unseen, back into the spirit world, it's like the spirit is entering, reuniting with the higher self. It's like this source of home, if you will, and one, where it's like that's where we fully are in the understanding and the connection. Although, so it's like it's just interesting. I don't know if I never thought that before.
Yeah, I mean, I get visuals sometimes that it's kind of like living underwater, that when you're on the earth, and that we only can see so much. And as I don't know, we're a fish and we can only see so much, and we think that the world is all there is, and then we're kind of moving along and doing what we can do to the best of our abilities. But then that moment when we transition and we breathe and come up for air, and I've seen those pictures of like the glaciers where we only have a little bit under the water, but there's so much more that's above us. Kind of that similar thing. So I think that's that's the recharging too. It's like we're finally able to take a breath and we look back down at what's below the water, and then it's a different perspective. It's like, oh yeah,
it's interesting. And they showed me another one where it's like in this like charger, it's like this feels like the center, and it was like a glove compartment opened in the vehicle, and there's like these road maps and all these like papers and stuff. I'm like, what is this? And I'm looking, and I heard Akashic Records. Because I feel like there's this familiarity or overlap, this kind of thread of the Akashic Records with the higher self, if you will. And so in this like glove compartment, they're showing that. So I'm curious what your thoughts are around.
So the Akashic Records, this is like mental, emotional gymnastics for me. Like, okay, now we're gonna flip on the other channel. But I mean, that's why it's so hard to talk about the higher self by itself because it's
It's so much
everything.
more. Yes, it's like
It's
that's
everything.
the thing that they're doing. Spirit's like, it's just like quit narrowing down on it. It's like just open up the
Well,
scope. That was the visual of the water, that's where they took me. So it's like it can look so different. It's the same and yet so different.
yeah.
It's wonderful. Yeah.
I mean, the Akashic Records, I mean, this was a question that was posted on their last show.
Oh,
If
thanks.
people aren't familiar with it or don't really conceptualize it, the best way to understand it is kind of like a storage device that records. And I think I saw someone on one of your shows talking about this yesterday, but where it's a storage device that records everything, every the emotion, every experience, every step. I mean, it's all right there. And it serves many different purposes. I mean, it's kind of like a catalog for, it's we're kind of like conduits on the circuit, and we're going out and we're learning everything and all that, and using the circuit symbol again. All that information is going back into the Akashic records. And again, it's not a literal physical thing or place, but it's an energetic kind of, it's like a computer. I mean, that's the best way to describe it, and best way we can conceive of it. It's always taking in all the energy and all the information. And the higher self, our higher selves do have access to that. And we do too. It takes practice and it takes work and commitment. And, I don't want to say certain qualities, but it's full access to everything. So it's like there are guardians of the Akashic records that you have to, if you have that access, they are there to protect it, and they are aware of the information, and they are aware of what you can know and you can't know, because ultimately it's all about non-interference. And so if you learn certain things about whether it be this lifetime or other lifetimes, and yes, our full lifetime right now right here is recorded there already, but there are that, for example, with hypnosis and going in and communicating with the higher self, there are times where, and again, it's that vague term of the higher self, but there are times where a client or someone might have a particular question, and it might not necessarily be about themselves. But for example, someone might want to know if their mother right now, right here, if they've had several lifetimes with her. And sometimes they'll say, that's information that we can't share right now because it might be something that will take them off track in their relationship and why they came here. And there's other times I've had them say, hold on 1 second. And then they'll, do some research, and they'll say, yes, she had a particular lifetime with her mother where she was the daughter and her mother was the mother was the daughter and she was the mother. And this was so many years ago. But a lot of times that type of information where they access it isn't what they brought to the table in terms of what someone needs to know right here, right now. So that's a whole other thing in terms of there's a game plan in place that you need to know. And sometimes they'll let you kind of wander off and explore. But most of the times it's like, no, she needs to do this right now because this life is the most important right now.
Yeah.
But yeah.
I love that. I think that'll actually really that resonates with me, and I hope that it resonates with other people about coming up against that place of you're in the frustration and you're trying so hard and you're not getting the answer or are understanding the why behind it. And that in the out frame of it, it can be for our protection. It's for our highest good. Probably always. I don't know if that's a fair thing to say, but it's perfect in that. And in that it can be the acknowledgement of surrender in some cases to really just consider that the not knowing is actually perfect.
Yeah. And I kind of brought that up, I think, in the last show too, where it's like if you had a life where you weren't, you killed someone, and then the karmic return was that you need to come back and be their father, that would cause kind of a complicated relationship. I mean, some people are equipped to handle that information, who are aware of, all the dynamics of why that might come to be. But in general, of people who aren't aware, and to know that your father murdered you in a past life would be disturbing. I would.
Yeah.
I don't even know if I'd want to know that, because
Right.
there's always that question in the mind.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's so interesting. Yeah, to sum up and that's the thing I love about it, where this leaves me just, in a place of being curious. And I'm so comfortable with that, where I feel like it's a good place to pause this conversation.
Mhm.
And I'm curious if people are interested in more, because I feel like there's like an infinity amount of episodes around just the higher self,
Yeah.
and how it takes us into so many different places. So
Yeah.
yeah, let us know in the comments if this resonated, what questions you have. There will be opportunity to put those in the comments, and hopefully this will get aired. Hopefully we did it right, or I get it right. All the pressure's on me over
Well,
here.
better, because I'm not going to.
Right? Totally. Oh my gosh, so
No,
funny.
of course I will.
Awesome. Jason, thank you for joining me. Always a pleasure.
Yeah.
We'll
Thank
do
you
this
for having
again.
me.
Yeah. We will see everybody again. Okay. Bye for now.
Bye.